Right, let's get started. Good evening. I'm Councillor Rob Field, Chairman of Audit, Governance and Standards Committee, and I'm pleased to welcome you all to this meeting. Before we start, may I take the opportunity to advise you that if the fire alarm sounds, please remain seated and members of the Democratic Services team will assess the situation and give further instructions on the evacuation of the building should it be necessary. Tonight's proceedings will be webcast by the Council, but if anyone else is intending to record these proceedings, can you please let me know now? I ask this question not to stop you, but merely to ensure that members and any members of the public in the room know that this is taking place. I would also like to advise members that they should only address the meeting by way of their microphones and to remind them to turn them off when they have finished speaking. We have a new member of the committee tonight. I'm very pleased to introduce Mr. David Dobbs, who is our newly co-opted independent member. Which moves us on to the substantive agenda. Item 1, apologies for absence. I have apologies from Councillor Trzebinski. No other apologies. Substitute members.
Councillor Spooner for Councillor Zabinski.
Thank you, Councillor Spooner. Item 3 is urgent items. I have agreed to take the report of the Heart of Mid-Kent, audit partnership relating to the internal audit plan 25-26 as an urgent item to avoid any delay in implementation of the plan. The report is circulated with the amended agenda and was sent round separately. In relation to this, I'm going to make a small change to the order of business so that it flows more logically. We will switch items 13 and 14, so we will take 14 directly after 12. Item number 4, visiting members. I don't see any in the chamber. Item 5, disclosures by members and officers. Are there any disclosures by members or officers? Thank you. Item 6, disclosures of lobbying. Are there any disclosures of lobbying? Thanks. Item 7, I move that the items on the agenda be taken in public as proposed. Is that agreed? Lovely, thank you. Item 8 is minutes of the meeting that we held on the 13th of January. I move that the minutes of the meeting held on 13th of January be approved as a correct record and signed. Lovely. Item 9, question and answer session for local residents. There are no questions from local residents this evening. Item 10, questions from members of the council to the chair. There are no questions from members to me as chairman this evening. Which brings us to item 11, complaints received under the members' code of conduct, which you'll find on page 12 of your papers. I call upon Gary Rowland, senior lawyer from corporate governance, to introduce the report.
Thank you, Chair, and good evening, members. On behalf of the Monitoring Officer, I'm presenting the 6-monthly Code of Conduct Update Report for the period 1st of September 2024 to the 28th of February 2025. You will see at Appendix 1 that the Monitoring Officer has received just one complaint during that period of time. Members are asked to please note the content of the report, and I'm happy to take any questions if there are any. Thank you.
Councillor Round.
Usually, I know we can't go into the depth and detail and personal substance of this, but when we talk about predetermination, it usually reflects the planning committee. Can you just confirm that, please?
Yes, you're correct. It will relate to planning committee.
Were there any other? Councillor Cooley.
Excuse me, I noted paragraph 2.5 that the Localism Act repealed the requirement to publish decision notices, the names of the complainant and so on. That doesn't mean we can't consider whether names should actually be published in certain circumstances. Just removed the legal requirement, but left us to determine with GDPR as a consideration, whether we can publish names. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct. So the Localism Act, as you rightly say, repealed that, so it now falls to the Data Protection Act and UK GDPR. So it's always a consideration that it could be, and that's something that the monitoring officer could consider further if you so wished.
May I suggest that this committee considers, and I haven't got a vote, whether if any allegations are found proven, whether in that instant names should be put forward. Thank you.
I think I'd be happy to take that on a case-by-case basis, following the advice of the monitoring officer around the severity of the accusation made and evidence collected. Anybody got a different view to that? Councillor Round?
I would agree with you on that basis, but can we have some legal advice on that?
As it currently stands, I'm aware that if a complaint is subject to an investigation, a formal investigation, which then proceeds to a standards hearing, at that point, details will be made public as to the subject member, the complainant, and the content of the complaint. At the moment, that is the only occasion where that happens. As I say, I can't really go any further tonight, but I'm happy to speak to the monitoring officer to see, you know, if he feels this is something that we could investigate further.
Councillor Round?
I take note of our parish member's view, and in many ways I get where it's coming from, but I think we'll take your advice, and can we follow that line, Chair?
Councillor Corley?
May I ask then, please, that when an allegation is proven, whether or not it gets to the hearing stage, that the monitoring officer states positively whether it has been decided not to disclose names or it has been decided to disclose names. Thank you.
Are there any other further comments on this item? Okay, thank you. We'll move on then to, where am I? Item 12, which is the internal audits documents update. You'll find that on page 17 of your papers. I call upon Catherine Woodward, Head of Mid-Kent Audit Partnership, to introduce the report supported by Kath Byford, Audit Delivery Manager for the Internal Audit Strategy.
Thank you, Chair. So agenda item 12 of your agenda packs brings 2 audit documents for your approval. So at the last meeting, we discussed the implementation and changes that are required from the new Global Internal Audit Standards. And both of these documents in this agenda pack have been refreshed or created new to reflect those new standards. So I'm going to speak briefly about the audit charter, and then my colleague Kath Byford will present the audit strategy to you. After I've presented the charter, I'll pause for questions, and then Kath will present the strategy and pause for questions. So the audit charter is not a new document, however ours did need updating. And the new standards presented us that opportunity to bring them up to date. And you can find this on page 21. So this is a formal document that details the internal audit's functions, mandate, organisational position, our reporting relationships, the scope of our work, the type of our work, and other specifications. So within this document, you'll see various sections covering the purpose of internal audit, the mandate of us, so the legislation that provides us the authority to do the job we do, our independence, our position, and our reporting relationships within the organisation, the Audit Governance and Standards Committee's responsibilities as well with regard to internal audit function, my responsibilities as the head of Mid-Kent Audit Partnership, how we will communicate with you, the quality assurance and improvement programme that we put in place to make sure that we're doing the jobs that we're supposed to be doing and how we can improve on that, and the scope and types of our service. So the very last page of the charter requests approval of this document by myself, the chairman of the committee and the Section 151 officer, which once we've received approval from the committee that they're happy with this document, we will sign that and this will be published document. So I'll pause there for questions on the audit charter, if anybody has any, before we move on to the strategy.
Any questions on the charter? Councillor Cooley?
May I please just check the accountability of audit, and I think it's a fundamentally important unit which does a very good job. The accountability is purely to whom or to which entity?
So the accountability for internal audit is to this committee and to the Section 151 officer of Maidstone Borough Council.
Therefore, if I may comment, and I think it's an excellent document, several times senior management is put alongside this committee, but in all instances it's this committee to which you are accountable. Thank you. Thank you.
Mr. Dobbs?
Yeah, thank you. Echo, that's a really good document, excellent. We talk in the document throughout about the new standards, and forgive me if this was covered at the last meeting. I just wondered what resources you would point members of this committee to in order to ensure they are fully up to speed with those new standards in a reasonably down-to-earth manner that they can understand and grapple with.
So at the last meeting, I provided some information to the committee, which is in the agenda packs from the last meeting, which gave reference to the essential conditions of the audit committee. So they're all there and available. And we have spoken about providing a further briefing session as well to members should they require it as we go through the year and we start to develop a bit more about the standards. So just on that point, and it will be sort of picked up in the strategy, we are required to have an external quality assessment, which is the audit of the auditors every 5 years. Ours is due this year, so I will be bringing something to the committee around about July time to talk about the external quality assessment that we'll be having, and at that point as well I'll provide the refresher on the standards as well, because I think that's an important time frame to make sure that you're aware of that.
Thank you, Chair. It's a very good document, I got to say that. Especially the setting out the long-term and short-term, that's really good roadmap. Looking at that one, I've been auditor for more than 15 years, and that's good. My question around the internal auditor, it talks about being the independent, the non-biased. Then it also talks about using the internal departmental one, but it does not capture the training or the competency, how we make sure the internal auditors are the competent enough to deliver the quality audit. Is that not something should be under the page number 36 under the threats? Because that's the gap you should be saying. Thank you.
So that's in the next bit that Kath's going to go through, a bit more about that document. That's fine. But throughout the year, we do cover the quality and the standards required of our internal auditors as well. So when we present the audit plan, which will come later, I'll talk a bit about the staff as well within the audit plan. And when I present my annual audit opinion in July, that also covers that aspect. So you will hear quite a lot of it throughout the year, but that point particularly will be covered in just the next section that Kath's going to present.
Councillor Cooley.
Thank you. Our independent member, Mr. Dobbs, I think made an excellent point. Training for members of this committee is all very well, but how will you judge whether the training has been absorbed so that this committee can actually discharge all of the responsibilities placed on it for all things audit? So, good point. We have training here and there. How can you demonstrate the training has been effective for this committee?
So I think as part of our annual review that we do with the committee, we will pick up that aspect as well. But given the fact that we've also got an EQA this year, our external quality assessor will want to interview members of this committee as well. So we will have an external reviewer who will come in and who will ask some of those questions of various members of the committee as well. And if it hasn't gone in, then we need to do some more work with the committee. So we will keep up to date and abreast of that to make sure that the committee is fully up to speed with those standards.
Are there any other comments before we move on to the strategy? So, Kathy, perhaps you'd like to take us through that.
Good evening, everyone. So I'm going to present tonight the audit strategy. Internal audit has always been subject to standards that we must conform to. Over the last 2 years, the standards have undergone significant review and update, and the new Global Internal Audit Standards, or GIAS, finally came into force in January this year. So under Principle 9 of the GIAS, the standards linked to this principle as well, internal audit are now required to develop an internal audit strategy. There's no set format for this, so we wanted to make it as accessible and as engaging as possible. And we really wanted to reflect the enthusiasm we feel in what we do and what we want to achieve. So initially we went for a bit of a traditional approach. We were up to 25 pages of quite dry text before we decided to take a bit of a different angle. So this is quite high level, but it does contain everything that it needs to, and it does demonstrate, I think, what we want to achieve. So some salient points to note. On page 34 of your reports pack, we want to make our purpose and vision known. So as internal auditors, we aim to add value by identifying opportunities for improvement. This isn't only in terms of strengthening the control environment and reducing risk, but also encouraging best practice and more efficient ways of working. On page 35, the strategy explains how the work we do aligns with the organisation's objectives, so how we work with stakeholders at all levels of the council to create a meaningful and relevant internal audit plan. So creating this strategy gave us a really good opportunity to reflect on where we are now and what we'd like to achieve. Our SWOT and maturity analysis gave us confidence that we do have a solid foundation to work from. We're really passionate auditors. We have a great team ethic, and we have the same collective aims. You'll see at page 37 that we've self-assessed our current status at the managed level. And as Kathy mentioned, we are subject to an EQA, so it'll be interesting to see what the external quality assessors says on that note. We tick most of those boxes. We use audit management software, which provides consistency, helps us to comply with the standards. And I do think we're known throughout the councils that we work with. We're regularly approached for advice and guidance, so I think we are becoming that trusted advisor. However, there is more that we can do. There's more that we can do to improve and to attain that optimised level. So pages 39 through 43 outline our critical success factors, our skills and resource analysis, and our strategic roadmaps. Two key elements to note are the council's use of risk management software. So as the councils become more risk mature and staff are actually updating their own risks, we can be more reactive in the work that we do. We've built flexibility into our audit plan, which Kathy will talk about later, so that we have the capacity to carry out those pieces of work as they arise. So essentially we're doing much more meaningful work for the councils. The second key issue to talk about is the resource issues. I think we're all aware that we have had resource issues on the team, and we'd really like to move to a model of career graded posts. Again, the strategy has helped us to really think about what we offer and reflect on the issues that we've had with recruitment in the past. So career graded posts means we'd look to recruit at more of a trainee level, an entry level, and provide opportunities to gain recognised qualifications as well as career progression. So we'd look at skills matrices and qualifications to attain those career graded posts. As page 46 says, the end of this particular strategy, we do know it's ambitious, but we do believe it's realistic. We've conducted a lot of analysis, review and self-reflection. We've identified what we want to achieve and the actions we need to take. We do know that there will be challenges, but we think we now have a really clear strategy going forward. So just looking for your comments and hopefully your approval.
Any comments? Oh. So, Councillor Barwick, and then I've got you, Councillor Dawes.
Thank you. Just looking at the strategic roadmap, the first time that I've seen where the local government reorganisation is mentioned is June next year. And I'm just wondering if that's leaving it a bit late, and also devolution, because I think planning needs to be started now, because there's going to be an impact right across the board on how these two will impact on councils right across Kent, let alone this one.
I think the timescale, as I understand it, for central government's ambitions in this space are that we will make a representation in March this year of the direction that we wish to go, and then there's a further submission in November, I believe. Then Parliament will take Christmas off. Whilst I think there will be stages of it where it picks up pace, I don't think it's going to move terrifically fast in the first instance. It's my instinct for it. And I would assume that the audit team will, although I will ask them to clarify, of course, has the flexibility to adapt to whatever the government does with its timetable in this one. But if you'd like to add any further comments.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And in terms of local government reorganisation, obviously there's a lot of conversations going on at the moment. Internal audit are party to a lot of those conversations. Obviously, Kathy has a seat at that table. And even just earlier this evening, we were sort of talking to the Chief Executive about support that we can provide throughout that process. I think this is quite a high-level document. It will be something that we'll be looking at and we'll be a part of. So yeah, I mean, I do take your point. Perhaps we could move that forward, but I think it's something that's very much in the background.
I think also I will potentially add a bit further to that comment when I talk about the audit plan for next year as well, because some of the changes that we're making to our audit plan is to give ourselves that flexibility to support the organisation throughout LGR, because at the moment nobody knows what that support will look like. So yes, we've recognised it within this document, and the audit plan document that comes next, we'll talk about it in a little bit more detail.
Councillor Dawes.
I seem to recall a few times reading in the audit papers that there was not an OS member within the audit team. I wasn't sure whether that was the external or internal audit at the time. Whereabouts are you advertising for your trainee auditors to come forward? Because I look through all Maidstone Borough Council website and it's obviously not in there. So it's obviously external audit. So how do you go about advertising the vacancy in your team?
So at the moment, we've got a trainee on the team and an apprentice working with us. We're looking towards potentially some sort of restructure, so that we can get those grading posts sorted. We've got a meeting tomorrow about that and how we can take it forward, because ideally we know there is potential to, we've been successful in recruiting at that trainee level and entry level, and speaking to other people in the profession, they're having the same sorts of experiences, particularly in the public sector. So if we can get people in, we've got incredible enthusiasm from our trainee and our apprentice at the moment. They're wonderful. And it's really driven us to think that this is what we want. We want to get people in at a level. We want to buy in that commitment to our team, which I think we're definitely seeing evidence of. So it's a bit watch this space at this particular moment. But yeah, there's a meeting tomorrow within the team, the management team, just to discuss that and take it forward.
Brilliant. It's good to know that it's on hand, because it looked like if it was still ongoing process, but it's in the process, they're training. My other questions was about, there was a lovely, on page 38, you're talking about data analysis and that you've got control tools across 3 lines with real-time monitoring alert. That sounds so sophisticated. What kind of 3 lines are you looking at? Technology and innovation column.
So this is the optimised status that we're not quite there yet. So this is an extract from one of the tools that the Chartered Institute for Internal Auditors supply. So we're at the managed level at the moment, which is on the page before, page 37. Page 38 is the optimised level, which is what we're striving to achieve through this strategy. However, the data analytics side of things is something we are trying to explore. Resourcing issues haven't allowed us to the extent that we'd like to. But going forward, we've actually got an auditor and systems officer, so she's starting to look at things, going on workshops and attending seminars, trying to get a bit more of that information, because we know in internal audit that data analytics is a fantastic tool that we can use. If we can move towards 100% population testing, it means we say goodbye to sample testing and the inherent risks that that provides. So there's tremendous benefits with data analytics, and it's a real buzz in the profession at the moment. But we're not quite there yet.
Thank you.
Councillor Cooch.
Thank you. I was just wondering if I could ask a question on the relationship between the two documents. The first document obviously talks a lot about the responsibilities of this committee and its duties, and I'm also aware that the second document is very high level, but I was wondering if it would be possible at some point to see a version of the roadmap that kind of integrates where this committee will fulfill its duties in some of the actions that you've set out. And I assume most of them will obviously come to these bi-monthly meetings, and that is the roadmap, but where there's reviews or where there's new documents being published, kind of how that lines up with our responsibilities as a committee on those. Thank you.
I think we could certainly, as Kathy or myself or Mark bring things to audit committee, we can align that with the strategy and say how that's fulfilling that strategic roadmap, perhaps. Does that sound reasonable?
Councillor Cooley.
Thank you. I note on page 36 on the SWOT analysis that devolution is seen as an opportunity or a threat, and I think that's probably absolutely right. But presumably internal audit has to plan not 100% that devolution will happen. You have to unfortunately plan for, is it the government policy succeeding or failing after the initial tranche? So it is an opportunity and a threat, so you're not giving up on thinking about Maidstone Borough Council, whether it has a town council at the urban core. You're not giving up on thinking about the borough current structure, are you?
No, definitely not. So the messages that I've been giving to our management team, particularly the role of internal audit, is very important throughout whatever changes are happening. And as a service, one of the things that we are very committed to doing is ensuring that every single service that Maidstone Borough Council provides now is in the best position going forwards if local government reorganisation happens or doesn't happen. But it's about making sure that we as Maidstone Borough Council have that voice going into whatever occurs next.
A more fundamental point, if I may, the strategy is moving towards a more flexible approach to calling which audit should be done when. And I just wonder, my earlier question on accountability still plays on this. Is it, I ask committee members, is it right that, I'm being blunt, you go off and determine your own priorities, or I'm making this up as I sit here, every quarter you come back with your forward plan adjusted, rather than you having unilateral flexibility, perhaps swayed by senior management, rather than this committee to whom you're accountable? Thank you.
So I think the point of independence has to come in there as well. And whenever so this is possibly slipping into the next item as well. But whatever we do, the audit plan I present to you is an audit plan that I have come up with that has not been overly influenced by the management of the council. So it's an audit plan based on the assurances that I need to provide to you as a committee And we take that's sacrosanct in terms of my profession. I would not be overly influenced by that management team, because that's not what the business we're in. We are there to be that independent, critical friend of the organisation and to make sure that they are in the best position going forwards. In terms of when we get onto the plan, we'll potentially talk about that, and I will be bringing the plan to you 6 monthly. I think it comes in the potential. We can bring it in September, I think, so that we can keep that plan up to date, and so the committee is fully appraised of the work that it is that we're doing in terms of our audit delivery. But for me, the most important thing is that I'm providing assurance across the breadth of the council to enable me to perform an annual audit opinion. And if I'm being unduly influenced by management team, I won't be able to provide that opinion. And as part of my profession, that's not something that I would do.
I was bonged out on some of your answers. It sounded really good. But if we're going to be presented with your plan at 6 monthly intervals, do we have your reasonable assurance that the plan we hear now, in 6 months' time, we will actually recognise that you've, being blunt, you've stuck to it unless some real emergency has come forward? Or is it going to be just thrown up in the air and it's whatever we're told?
I think when we move on to the audit plan, this will probably become a bit clearer, so we'll perhaps pick that point up at that moment.
Are there any other questions or comments? Mr. Dobbs.
Yeah, I empathise with the position you're in regarding resourcing and recruitment. It's really tough right now. People just don't want to go into the profession. So it's good to hear you've got a strategy to address that. I think in one of these documents it talks about if you can't recruit, you'll potentially look to using contractors. I'm just wondered if that leads to increased costs. Is that something that's then passed on to your client bodies?
So yes, in terms of the partnership, yes, it would potentially be passed on. What we have managed to do over the last few years, though, is keep our costs within our budget. So we have not had to pass on additional costs as of yet. So what we're doing moving forwards, and this is in the next item as well, that we're talking about the audit plan and the use of contractors, is we do make sure that we utilise our vacant posts to fund that and not exceed our budget, because we are very fortunate that we can use some contractors who are local government contractors and they don't cost an arm and a leg.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
If there are no other comments or questions, we are asked to approve the documents. So I would like to move that they are approved as outlined on the papers. Do I have anybody that would second? Thank you, Councillor Greenan. Is that agreed? Thank you. Right, so that takes us, as I said earlier, to item 14, which is on your supplementary paperwork, which is for the internal audit plan, which Cathy just mentioned. So I call upon Cathy Woodward, Head of Mid-Kent Audit Partnership, to introduce the report.
Thank you, Chair. So this is agenda item 14, which I think starts at page 67 of your packs. So the internal audit plan 25-26. So in the last item that we presented to you, we've spoken a lot about the new standards and how we will deliver the internal audit function. So this report is what we're actually going to deliver and how we can provide that statutory assurance that's required by the Accounts and Audit Regulations 2015 and the Global Internal Audit Standards. So our approach to constructing this year's plan has been slightly different to previous years, and given the level of change that the organisation has been through in the past, and that is potentially expected over the short to medium term, we have taken a slightly different approach. So the plan I'm presenting today is trying to find a balance between defined expectations and flexibility, which I think references some of the point that you were trying to make, Councillor Cooling. So page 74 of the report highlights the changes that we're making to one of continual risk assessment and an adaptive plan based on those risk assessments. And this allows us to respond to changing priorities of the organisation, which could be things like local government reorganisation. At the minute, those are unknown, but what we're trying to do is to do that without compromising the level of assurance necessary to provide that annual audit opinion. So page 75 is a list of essential audits that we will complete. These are going to be considered as mandatory. These audits will be delivered no matter what. So there are 9 of these audits on the audit plan. What we then did was we assessed the rest of the audit universe. So the audit universe is everything we could possibly audit, which numbers over 100 different things. So we've assessed the rest of that plan to determine what other audits we could include that are necessary at this moment in time. So when completing our assessments, we consider various things like the corporate risk registers, any other compliance requirements we have, national and local issues, external audit views, our own organisational knowledge, past audit results and outstanding actions that may be there. We had input from heads of service, directors and other themes, annual governance statement, member feedback and strategic priorities. So once we assessed all of these areas, we then categorised and prioritised potential audits by using criteria such as the financial impact, the confidence in existing processes, reputational significance, susceptibility to change, susceptibility to fraud, and other regulatory compliance. So when coming up with things to put into the plan, we consider an awful lot of information that the authority holds. So what this has helped us to do is to provide a list of other possible audits in addition to the 9 that we're going to do, which is on page 77. Sorry, excuse me. So we'll select from this list, in addition to the previous 9, to make sure that we have a sufficient level of audit work that's been delivered to form an annual audit opinion. What I have included on here is the audit coverage classification, and this is a tool that I use to ensure that we get that breadth across the organisation, that we're covering financial audits, governance audits, people audits, infrastructure and operational audits as well, to give us that nice breadth across the organisation. So the last thing I was just going to talk about is on page 81, and this details the resource requirements for delivering our internal audit service. So within here we do talk about our resource that we currently have and the vacant posts that we also have within here. And as was mentioned earlier, we are potentially considering using some contractors to help us with that delivery, which we have done this year, which has been quite successful. And you can see there's a table at the bottom which breaks down the total number of audit days we're delivering and the other level of the work that we deliver as part of the internal audit service. So I'm happy to take any questions. If anybody's got any on the audit plan.
Councillor Titchem.
Yes, if I may, just a quick question on page 77. The previous audits of all these items are about 4 years, 5 years, 6 years old. Some of them are weak as a result. I just want to know why, if they were weak in 2017, for example, which is the leisure one, why has nothing been done since?
So I think some of these audits, yes, that one, theatre operations, 2016-17, it was weak. Whenever we do an audit, when we complete it, we then do follow-up work on it to ensure that they are addressing the weaknesses that we have identified at that point. Sometimes some of these audits don't always fall into that priority of high or medium, and they can be considered a lower priority to us. And when, as I mentioned, our universe with over 100 items, it's very difficult to try and get a coverage over 5 years, which is what we aim to do, is to cover everything within a 5-year window. So some of them have slipped through the net. Some of this is as a result of COVID and lockdown, because when you go back, that was 5 years ago, so there was a huge amount of work paused at that point. And I think, unfortunately, it's just one of those things, and that's why it's on this audit plan now, because this now represents the last of those really out-of-date audits that haven't been done for a while.
Dawes.
So that was part of my question, so thank you very much for starting it. When is your timescales for remaking audits on those 3 weak points in the future?
Well, until we've audited them, we don't know what their future results are going to be. So all of these ones we're hoping we want to do in this year coming forwards. Yes, this is this year's plan for 25-26.
Councillor Cooling.
May I just ask, please, the 240 days of audit projects, excuse me, is that assuming a fully staffed and backfilled as necessary with contract, a fully staffed team, or just, no disrespect, just the current level of internal staff?
So number of days here is based on a full establishment, so fully resourced, which is why we will be potentially using some contractors to bridge that gap so that we can ensure that we deliver those 240 days of audit projects.
And if I may ask a follow-up, I note that there are 9 essentials, and I note the 2 new ones, which strike me as rather important, and 17 of other potential ones. Did I mishear you? Are you hoping to be able to do the 9 plus 17, or 9 you'll focus on and you'll pick up a few of the 17? Which is it, please?
So it will be a definite 9 and as many of the other 17 as we can get done within the 240 days that we have. Any that we don't get done will roll forwards into next year's audit plan.
And one, if I may, I note in here somewhere or other there's the word quarterly. Complete each quarterly, refreshes complete each quarter. Again, I would ask this committee to consider whether you want, as this is now going to be a flexible plan, do you want an update at each of the meetings we have, or are you still happy, and this is not a distrustful question, or are you happy with just 6 monthly? Thank you.
So we do have quite a busy agenda through the year, and the assurances that we've had from external auditors would indicate that we have robust procedures. So I'm quite comfortable, but Councillor Barwick, you indicated?
Yeah, I'm looking at the page 77, the environmental enforcement on waste crime team was not assessed. When is that due to be assessed? Because it's quite a hot topic, or has been recently.
So just on that audit then, that was looked at in 1920. The reason it was not assessed was because it was being audited at the point we went into lockdown. So the audit was never completed to a point that they could give a full assurance rating on that audit. And it is one that we have on this year's audit plan to look at. So everything on this list is what we're drawing from for next year, and if we don't do it next year, it will be the year after. But strangely enough, the team leader for waste crime actually contacted me the other day and said he would like some support, so that was probably going to be quite high on the list.
Okay, so we're being asked as a committee to approve the proposed audit plan. I'd like to take that separately first. I'm happy to propose that as described in the papers. Is there a seconder? Thank you, Councillor Dawes. Is that agreed? Thank you ever so much. We are also asked to note at points 2 and 3 of this report that both the Head of Audit Partnerships view that the internal audit team currently has sufficient resources to deliver the plan and a robust Head of Audit opinion, and that her assurance that the plan is compiled independently and without inappropriate influence from management based on conversations. Are we happy to agree to note those? Yeah. Okay. Thank you. Kathy, you're welcome to stay for the risk item if you wish, or if you prefer to leave, you can do so. Right, so that brings us to the final part of our agenda, which is item 13, our budget risk assessment update, which is on page 48 of your papers. And I call upon Mark Green, Director of Finance, Resources and Business Improvement, to introduce the report.
Thank you, Chair. As members know, I bring this report each meeting to give an overview of the budget risks that, in my view, the organisation faces. So, if you like, the kind of things that keep me awake at night. And just to summarise what's in the report, first of all, in the short term, this year we're very close to coming in within budget for the year, currently projecting a small overspend of 49,000 on a budget of 28 million. So that's very small, 0.2%, and we may even be able to get to a balanced position by the end of the year, albeit that is a combination of overspends and underspends, which net out to a more or less balanced position. For next year, having built in the things that we know are going to be pressures, we have been able to propose a balanced budget to Council. That was agreed by Council a couple of weeks ago. Again, there's a reasonable level of confidence that next year we'll again be able to achieve a balanced position. The position further forward is a lot more risky, and I feel like the boy who cries wolf, because probably ever since I've been writing these reports, I've been talking about the fair funding review and government's proposal to overhaul the system of local government funding. It keeps getting pushed back, which is good news for Maidstone, because we do reasonably well out of the current arrangements, but it will certainly be introduced for 26-27, and there's a range of possible outcomes, but it's generally felt that the fair funding review will mean redirecting resources away from areas like Maidstone to areas which are perceived to have greater levels of deprivation. And to give you an idea of the scale of the numbers, we engage an organisation called Pixel to do projections for us, and they assume that the annual impact for Maidstone will be £7 million a year. Now, if you consider that our budget is 28 million, that would be a huge impact for us to have to absorb. It may not be as bad as that, because what always happens whenever there are major changes in local government funding is that the impact is damped. So we won't feel that impact in year one, and the estimate is that that 7 million would maybe just be 2 million in 26-27. Even 2 million extra savings to find will be a tall order. So that's absolutely something that merits being a high risk and is included as such in the risk register. The other big risk is around the capital programme, which I've mentioned several times before. We've got an ambitious capital programme, and page 53 lists the various risks that are involved with this. And also a couple of risks that are linked to it, because a lot of the capital programme is about delivering affordable housing. We have to fund the cost of the subsidy that goes with social or affordable housing. We're putting money aside every year for that, but particularly if we have the pressures of the fair funding review, it will get more difficult to do that in the future. So that's described as risk V, Housing Investment Fund, which is where we put the money for affordable housing aside, insufficient to deliver the quality housing programme. And the other risk that's related to that, if you like, a subset of the one around the capital programme, although it's not just a risk for capital, is the risk of a contractor or a supplier failing. So that's been added as risk word W, just to bring that out as a specific item. And I haven't mentioned local government reorganisation so far in relation to this report, because what this risk register tries to do is look at the risks for Maidstone Borough Council, but of course Maidstone Borough Council may not be here in just over 3 years' time. But in that time, there are risks for us, and there's a number that I can see. One is that the work of preparing for local government reorganisation will be a big demand on management time for the council. So although we will seek to mitigate that, there's a risk that it will be a distraction from the running the business day to day. So that's certainly a risk. Another one is around recruitment and retention, because it may well be that as people see the long-term prospects at Maidstone Borough Council diminishing, they'll look elsewhere. So absolutely we have to mitigate that risk by making sure that people see that there's a future in Maidstone Council. And of course, employees of Maidstone Council, on the face of it, would 2P across to a new authority when it's formed. But that's certainly a risk that we have to manage with local government reorganisation. So I'll leave it at that. You've got the summary here, and then the detailed list of risks on page 56, and then the individual risks are itemised on the following pages. So very happy to answer questions on this and any views that members may have on anything that I've missed, maybe not given enough emphasis to within the risk register. Thank you.
Any questions or comments? We'll start with Councillor Dawes.
My first one is I've never heard of fair funding review. I probably should. So maybe you want to explain me that one.
So you want an explanation of what the fair funding review from central government's perspective is? I'll allow Mr. Green to elaborate.
The current system of local government financing was introduced in 2014, and it was based on an assessment then of the relative resources and levels of deprivation of all the local authorities. Then, that's over 10 years ago, and so it's felt that the current settlement is unfair on areas that have gone down in relation to the national average since then, and these would generally be places in the Midlands and North. Conversely, the South East has done quite well, so that means that we will lose resources, and the way that would happen is that we would probably take a lower proportion or retain a lower proportion of the business rates that we collect. That's the main thing that the government can change. They don't give us a block grant anymore, but they do determine how much of business rates we can keep. So that's how it would affect us. The other way that has been talked about in the past is something called negative revenue support, where we actually pay a tax to central government. That's another way in which they could redirect resources away from places like Maidstone to authorities elsewhere in the country. So fair may not be fair for Maidstone, but that's the concept of the fair funding review.
Thank you very much. Now you've done the explanation. I remember asking that question a few months ago and you gave me the answer, and I was like, yes, that's what he was talking about. Sorry about that. But I hope it was helpful for other member maybe. I was looking at the capital funding programs and how there's a risk of not having sufficient amount of money, if I understood, to actually fully complete the housing stocks that we want to do. Is that correct? And I was wondering from this, I know we have 10 million that is supposed to be coming in 2026, but is the council is looking at the interest rate and having a projection of what the interest rate might be next year and thinking ahead, do we want to start having start borrowing again to have enough money to fund the capital program?
Yes, as you've suggested, Councillor Dawes, the risk around the capital programme is about availability of borrowing, because we have to fund the capital programme through borrowing. And as the report explains, in the short term, we've got access to relatively low-cost borrowing. I think when we took out that borrowing in 2022, we thought, well, it was generally felt that interest rates would come down over time. That's not happened. We're still looking at borrowing costs from the Public Works Loan Board of over 5%. So that means that it will be more difficult to fund the capital programme as time goes by. Doesn't mean the capital programme will disappear altogether. It just means the threshold for viability of individual schemes will get higher. So we may not be able to deliver everything that we had originally hoped to. So that's the risk around the capital programme.
So we're not considering at all any risk of the inflation's going up rather than down?
Well, that's a separate risk, but which affects not just the capital programme, but also the revenue budget, because we might be faced with higher expenditure, for example, on the waste contract, which where the costs are linked to inflation indices, but maybe without the ability to increase our income, our revenue, sufficiently to cover those additional costs. So that is itemised as a separate risk.
Thank you very much.
Councillor Cooley.
Thank you very much. Mark, I believe you said that TUPE would apply, which I would have thought it would, but no names, no pack drill. County Councillor speculated to me, or said to me, a Kent County Councillor, that if the unitaries went ahead, then for some reason or other TUPE would not apply, because all of the jobs in the unitaries would be scoped out to be different, and therefore they'd all be advertised and everyone have to put their hands up and apply. Now, I think TUPE applies from my background, but is there a risk that TUPE will not apply, and that which would reinforce your point, your concern about staff deciding they need to look elsewhere? So are you pretty darn certain, forgive me, that TUPE applies? And I've got other questions. Does it apply?
Councillor Pooling, it's a difficult question to answer very specifically, and of course everything depends on how the reorganisation happens. I think the thing to bear in mind here is that almost all of the services that Maidstone Borough Council currently delivers will continue to be delivered by a new unitary authority. So if you've got a member of staff who's cleaning the streets or providing services at the museum, anywhere, I mean, those jobs are still going to be there. So I understand what may have been said by a KCC councillor, but given those services will continue, it'd be hard to make a case that the jobs aren't capable of being transferred across to the new authority. But that's not legal advice or with any kind of authority.
If I may, I wholeheartedly subscribe to what you've just said. I think a lot of common sense should apply. But if you want to stop any rumours amongst staff that they're in enhanced risk, you may well wish to get an employment lawyer to please, I'm telling you how to suck eggs, to look at the situation. But if I may, and I welcome your identification of risks U, V and W, and I'll come back to that in a minute, but I also gather there's a thought that Maidstone Borough Council's local plan review may in fact fail on 5 years housing supply when the 5 years housing supply is assessed and published in April or early May. And if it does fail, and I really hope for the borough it doesn't, but if it does, then presumably there'll be a budget implication of more major applications, speculative applications coming in, and more probably appeal funding required. So I would ask you please to consider by the next meeting, if 5 years housing supply is threatened, and I really hope it isn't, could we please have a risk put on here of the fallout from that? Because living right next to Tunbridge and Malling in Teeson, I can see the fallout, and it's fairly significant. So at that point, just a request that you look at that risk. Secondly, on the housing front, and it's picking up your point, I see that the sinking fund, or the fund set aside to subsidise the 1,000 affordable homes, at the moment would look after about 240, whereas there's land already purchased, as I understand it, for 450. So a question from my ignorance, is the are any planning permissions applicable to that land for 450 and those 250 funded houses? Are those planning applications contemplated, and is the funding for progressing them, because you'll have the land, you'll be the applicant and the whatever, are the funds appropriate to processing that? Is it 240 or 450 contemplated within the current budget? Thank you.
The 450 is all within the capital programme, but as you've picked up, we don't have enough money in the Housing Investment Fund to deliver the subsidy. So far as planning permission is concerned, we have, I'd have to come back to you with the detailed number, but it's, we've certainly got planning permission for well in excess of 240 of those homes. So we'd have to assess the situation at the time where we were about to issue a contract for the delivery of those homes to be confident that we could actually provide affordable housing. I mean, worst case is that that we would go ahead with the development, but would have to just let them as private sector accommodation, but that's clearly not what the council would want to do.
Final point, if I may, if you come up with a risk, what's after W, X, relating to 5 years housing supply, my memory is failing me on whether the LP, the local plan review, actually contemplated and built in the 1,000 affordable homes on broadly identified sites. My memory is failing me, but presumably if risk X is assessed next time, then presumably whomever is preparing the 5 years housing supply analysis will take full cognizance of where the borough has got on, is it the 240 or the 450? We do not want to lose our local plan review, is my personal view.
Yeah, my understanding is that the, well, it was originally 1,000 affordable homes. Those are reflected in the current local plan, so we haven't made life even more difficult for ourselves by not including them.
Are there any other questions or comments? Councillor Titchener.
Yes, thank you, Jim. If I may, I hope it's not a loose cannon, but we had the Traveller DPD, been talking about it for months, if not years. One of the problems is that Maidstone doesn't have a 5-year supply for traveller sites. Is there anything in this risk factor or in the budget for purchasing sites for travellers over the next, for 5 years supply?
Yes, in the capital programme that was agreed by council a couple of weeks ago, there was an allocation in the capital programme for purchase and delivery of one new gypsy and traveller site.
What's the capacity of that? Any idea?
To come back to you on that, Peter, I don't have the details.
I think we need more than one site, frankly, don't we?
It's hard enough to find one. I don't believe we have yet to actually, we're setting aside our budgets for getting the site, but we haven't yet allocated it. So without an allocation of a site, it's great to say two, but we need to find one.
So I assume the budget's got, and I haven't got it in front of me, a very substantial figure for enforcement and appeal defence.
Yes, we have, as I'm sure you know, Councillor Quillian, we have budgets for enforcement and to allow for appeals, and I'll take your point that we'll assess the level of those in the light of what comes out about the 5-year housing supply.
Any further comments or questions? Okay, so we are asked to note the report and risk assessment. I'd like to move that we do so as described on the papers. I was seconder. Oh, Councillor Round, thank you. Is that agreed, members? Thank you. That concludes our business for the evening, so I declare the meeting closed.